Welcome to History with Herodotus, where we embark on a journey through the sands of time, unearthing the secrets of our collective past. Today, we find ourselves at the threshold of one of the most pivotal battles in modern history, the Battle of El Alamein, 1942. This desert landscape, nestled between the Mediterranean Sea and the endless dunes of the Sahara, would become the stage for a clash of titans, as the Axis powers, led by the indomitable Rommel, faced off against the Allied forces under the resolute command of Bernard Montgomery. As we delve into the events that unfolded in the scorching deserts of Egypt, we must first set our gaze upon the broader canvas of World War II. The year was 1942, and the war had been raging for 3 years, with the Axis powers having made significant gains in Europe and North Africa. The Allies, however, were beginning to gain momentum, as the United States had entered the fray, bringing with it a tidal wave of industrial might and military prowess. In the summer of 1942, the Axis forces, led by Rommel's Africa Corps, had been making steady advances in North Africa, pushing deep into Egyptian territory. The Allies, under the command of General Claude Auchinleck, were struggling to hold back the tide as their forces were stretched thin across the desert landscape. The battle lines had been drawn, with the Axis powers seeking to capture the strategic port city of Alexandria, and the Allies determined to prevent them from doing so. As we navigate the complex web of events leading up to the Battle of El Alamein, we find ourselves in the midst of a fascinating cast of characters. There was Rommel, the desert fox, a master strategist with an uncanny ability to adapt to the harsh conditions of the desert landscape. His opponent, Montgomery, was a man of unyielding resolve, driven by a fierce determination to defend Egypt and secure a crucial victory for the Allies. In the months preceding the battle, both sides engaged in a series of skirmishes and probing attacks as they sought to test each other's defenses and gather vital intelligence on the enemy's dispositions. The Axis forces, bolstered by a steady stream of reinforcements from Italy, were confident in their ability to break through the Allied lines, while the Allies, buoyed by the arrival of fresh troops and equipment from Britain, were determined to hold firm. The Axis forces, with Rommel at the helm, had amassed a formidable army, comprising German and Italian troops, as well as a sizable contingent of tanks and artillery. The Allies, under Montgomery's command, had also assembled a powerful force with a mix of British, Australian, New Zealand, and South African units, supported by a substantial array of armor and air power. The battle lines were drawn, with the Axis forces arrayed along a series of ridges and hills stretching from the Mediterranean coast to the Qattara Depression, a vast expanse of salt marshes and sandy dunes. The Allies, meanwhile, had established a strong defensive perimeter, anchored on the town of El Alamein, which would become the focal point of the impending battle. As the days ticked by, the tension mounted, as both sides engaged in a series of intense artillery duels and patrols probed the enemy's lines, seeking to uncover weaknesses and vulnerabilities. The air was thick with anticipation, as the soldiers on both sides steeled themselves for the impending clash, knowing that the outcome would have far-reaching consequences for the course of the war. As the clock struck midnight on October 23, 1942, the Allied forces launched a massive artillery barrage, signaling the beginning of the Battle of El Alamein. The desert landscape was illuminated by the flashes of over 1,000 guns as a wall of fire and steel descended upon the Axis positions. The cacophony of sound was deafening, with the thunder of explosions and the shriek of shells filling the air. Montgomery's plan, codenamed Lightfoot, called for a gradual and relentless push forward, with the infantry advancing behind a curtain of artillery fire supported by tanks and air power. The initial assault was led by the 9th Australian Division, which advanced on the northern flank, aiming to capture the strategic high ground of the Ruwaisat Ridge. The Australians fought bravely, overcoming fierce resistance from the German 16th 4th Infantry Division, and slowly but surely they began to gain ground. As the night wore on, the Allied forces made steady progress, pushing forward in a series of carefully coordinated phases, with each unit building on the gains of the previous one. On October 24, the battle raged on, as the Allies continued to pound the Axis positions with artillery and air attacks. The German and Italian troops, however, refused to yield, fighting tenaciously to hold their ground. Rommel, who had been absent from the battlefield due to illness, returned to take command of the Africa Corps, and he immediately set about reorganizing his defenses and launching counterattacks against the Allied forces. One of the most pivotal moments of the battle came on October 25, when the 1st Armored Division, supported by the 10th Royal Hussars, launched a daring attack on the Axis positions near the town of El Alamein. The British tanks, led by the fearless Lieutenant Colonel John Curry, charged forward with bayonets fixed, cutting through the German lines and causing widespread disruption. As the dust settled, it became clear that the Allies had broken through the Axis defenses and the enemy was beginning to falter. In the midst of this chaos, a young British lieutenant named Henry Gardner found himself at the forefront of the battle. As he led his platoon forward, he recalled the words of Montgomery, who had addressed the troops before the battle, saying, "The battle will be won by the side that can take the punishment." Gardner's unit came under intense fire, but they held their ground, returning fire and slowly advancing on the enemy positions. As the day drew to a close, Gardner reflected on the ferocity of the fighting, noting in his diary, "The noise is still ringing in my ears, and I can smell the acrid tang of smoke and sweat." As the battle entered its 4th day, the Axis forces were beginning to show signs of exhaustion. The Allies, however, continued to push forward, driven by their momentum and determination. On October 26, the 2nd New Zealand Division launched a series of attacks on the German positions near the town of Tel Elasa, slowly but surely grinding down the enemy's defenses. The Kiwis, as they were known, fought with characteristic bravery, overcoming formidable obstacles and inflicting heavy casualties on the Axis troops. As the 2nd New Zealand Division continued to apply pressure on the German positions near Tel Elasa, the Axis forces were gradually pushed back, their defenses weakening with each passing hour. On October 28, the Allies launched a final, decisive assault, code-named Supercharge, which aimed to break through the remaining Axis lines and shatter their resistance once and for all. The attack was led by the 9th Armored Brigade, supported by infantry and artillery, and it proved to be a crushing blow as the German and Italian troops were overwhelmed by the sheer weight of the Allied onslaught. As the Axis forces began to retreat in disarray, Montgomery's plan had finally come to fruition. The Battle of El Alamein was all but won, and the Allies had secured a vital victory that would change the course of the war in North Africa. On November 5th, the Axis forces withdrew from El Alamein, leaving behind vast quantities of equipment and supplies, as well as thousands of prisoners. The battle had been one of the bloodiest and most intense of the war, with over 13,000 Allied casualties and more than 30,000 Axis troops killed, wounded, or captured. In the aftermath of the battle, Winston Churchill, the British Prime Minister, would later say, "This is not the end. This is not even the beginning of the end, but it is, perhaps, the end of the beginning." These words encapsulated the significance of El Alamein, which marked a turning point in the war, as the Allies began to gain the upper hand against the Axis powers. The battle had shown that, with determination and strategic planning, even the most formidable enemy could be defeated. Today, the Battle of El Alamein is remembered as a pivotal moment in history, one that paved the way for the Allied victory in World War II. The bravery and sacrifice of the soldiers who fought and died at El Alamein are still honored and commemorated, with many regarding it as one of the greatest battles of all time. The legacy of El Alamein can be seen in the modern-day town of El Alamein, which has become a place of pilgrimage for historians and enthusiasts alike. That's all for today's History with Herodotus. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, remember that to understand the present, we must first understand the past.